Welcome everyone to another episode of the Gold Silver Bitcoin Show, brought to you by the GoldSilverBitcoin.com store. We are honored to be sitting down today with Jason Nordlund. He is the founder of the Norstar Group. He's a fund manager. He keeps an eye on the gold and silver markets. We're going to talk about those, and we're also going to talk a little bit about the macro picture as well. So thank you so much, Jason, for joining us today.
Hey, honored to be here. Really excited.
Why don't, before we get going, you introduce yourself and what you do?
Absolutely. My name's Jason Nordland. I live in Minneapolis, Minnesota, and part of the Frozen Chosen here. And I started a fund in 2015, and I just really introduced it to family and friends primarily initially, and got my start by trading options actually, and that was our primary focus when we first launched, and made some money trading. Did really good during COVID. COVID was actually was really good to us. I was confident in the position the Fed would take. When the market bottomed out in, I think it was March or April, say 2020, and so it was well timed for us, and we went long and got very aggressive during that time, and it just, we had great results from it. And so that's led us into a lot of different other avenues of investment. I have my two favorite asset classes that we share in common, and so I'm very focused today on just looking for great risk reward setups and opportunities. We like to be first to write checks in our various ventures, and we're having a good time. We've had a really good, the last couple of years have been really good to us. So.
In what ways was 2020 COVID year good for you and the firm? So I suppose you predicted the approximate Fed policy, which was to inject $6 trillion into the markets, I believe.
Well, the Fed's playbook shouldn't be a secret to anybody at this point anymore, right? So obviously I didn't know that math, and I could have, even in my worst nightmare, could have never thought that one up. But I was confident they'd keep the market propped up, and that's exactly what happened, and continues to be obviously their only game, it appears. So yeah, that was.
There's a significant culture shift at that time as well towards the digital realm, which created lots of opportunities, I think, where you could sift through and see what sorts of companies were going to see their use increase exponentially. And I believe we're still seeing that process play out, actually. So there might be some, I guess, lower stack type companies that are public who are have benefited from this shift to, I guess, work from home or work from everywhere culture. But because they're lower in the stack, that thesis hasn't entirely played out. Twilio comes to mind, for instance. I did a research paper at that time looking at different stocks that I thought would perform well at that time. And the thesis was pretty simple. It was essentially tech stocks and software stocks of companies that are being used, of programs that might benefit and augment
Sure.
of work from home, I suppose, or also, I guess, digital business processes. Did you now, other than the Fed propping the market up, have any other theses that you acted on at that time?
Well, certainly, when I look at the big picture, to me, it's obvious there's one asset class in particular that hasn't been propped up due to artificially low interest rates, right, and manipulation. And that is precious metals. And so I've had a hand in that realm for about the last decade. And it was about 10 years ago I started investing in the mining business. And of course, it's just, I've been very early to the party. I used to follow, I'm guessing, a lot of the same people that you've followed over the years. And what I've learned from them is that they're right. Their timing is way wrong. And so I'm still confident to this day that the investments that we've made in that space are going to pay out, and pay out in a big way. And I think the longer it takes, the better it gets for us down the road. So that was certainly a thesis that I was hanging on to. That's been important to me this entire time. Still a matter of when, no longer if. But when is a big question still, and even with all the money printing we're still seeing that asset class. Um, it's still not getting its fair share of the market, I don't think, and certainly it's had to move over and share the stage a little bit more so, or quite a bit more so, I would say, with this new asset class that's entered the world here, in the last 10 years, but more so even in the last couple, it's become very significant, and that is crypto, of course. And so that's another that's another thesis that I had to reevaluate. I was paying attention and watching what was happening with Bitcoin and everything else since the beginning, probably since you started paying attention as well. But I wasn't buying, I wasn't active. But it was like towards late summer of 2020 where I realized that um, blockchain, the technology, Bitcoin for sure was absolutely here to stay, and I needed some exposure to it. We had made some money, we'd made some good decisions with our investment dollars, and I had some money to deploy, and so I made a point to allocate to that space, and I'm very glad I did, because we got in just before the rush that occurred last year in that space, and so it's very exciting. But those are the two drivers for me. Those are the things that get me up every morning and get me excited about what I'm doing. It's really those two asset classes. So.
Before you entered into the mining uh, sector, were you investing in gold and silver, physically or otherwise?
No, I wasn't. My story is I was a real estate investor, and that's really where I began my career as an investor in my early 20s even. And I really hadn't considered much outside of that. It took the housing crisis, the mortgage crisis in 2008 to really, first of all, it brought me to my knees. But it was a really good experience overall, because it kind of forced me to go back to the drawing board. And so then I became very, very, I was like a sponge, like, what makes an economy crash? How does it grow? And that's really where I became a student of macroeconomics. I fell into Austrian economics very, very quickly, and that made sense to me, that philosophy. And, my convictions grew quite a bit on what was happening on a larger scale. But yeah, that's kind of where it started for me. But prior to that, it was investing in real estate, and that's kind of where I cut my teeth. So.
On the topic of mining, so I'm curious, what have you learned over 10 years of investing in mining about that sector? And also, I guess, what indicators do you look at to try to master timing, which I know you mentioned has been
Sure.
difficult?
Yeah, no, mastering timing is, it's different as a trader versus an investor. An investor, you're comfortable typically parking money that you're willing to give it some time to play out. Whereas with trading, you can't. If you're wrong in your timing, you're dead in the water. If you're trading, options, or any sort of derivative product, it could destroy you fast. And so it's a completely different skill set and mindset, trading versus investing. But as far as indicators, you again, as you continue to see things play out on the world stage, um, it only becomes more inevitable to me that there's something really good lining up. But I would say the biggest proof of anything is that central banks of the world, particularly in the East, are acquiring gold, or mainly gold, as fast as they can, and at a very rapid rate. So that tells me that if you have the most powerful banks in the world that are fighting for this one resource still, it's pretty significant. And I still believe that it's he who has the most gold makes the most rules. Or I'm sorry, he who has the most gold makes the rules. And um, again, love crypto and love its place on the world stage. But if you look at the actions of the central bankers, what they're doing, to me, it's inevitable, and again, a matter matter when. So as far as specific indicators, so I don't know for sure that that answered your question, but for instance, if you look at it on a trading basis, right now you have gold and silver that's fairly choppy, but you have the miners that even when gold is trading down some days, you have the miners that are going up. That's extremely bullish for the industry. So that's a very key indicator right there, and certainly something I would take as a cue that there's good days ahead for us here, even in the short to mid run, I would say, for sure in the long run.
One of the reasons why on this show I stick to Bitcoin only when it comes to the crypto realm, although I do categorize Bitcoin as a different than the quote altcoins, which define themselves in relation to Bitcoin. I
Sure.
think that the theses behind these two, I guess, commodities or technologies or movements are quite different. So that's why I kind of have pulled Bitcoin out of the general crypto sphere. And another reason is its adoption by nation states, by Fortune 500 companies and higher, as well as municipalities incorporating Bitcoin, whether paying employees. Of course, politicians are celebrating themselves for making up rules in which they get paid in Bitcoin. That's happened in New York. You know what? I'm going to kind of the New York mayor basically made a big hoopla out of that. He was accepting Bitcoin in payment, which is just like, wow. Anyway, that's one reason why I'm looking at Bitcoin from this geopolitical macroeconomic picture. And I've pulled crypto out and I speak about crypto on the side. Now, I know you are interested in the underlying technology, namely blockchain. I'm curious why that emphasis in relation to Bitcoin, why that emphasis on blockchain and not Bitcoin for you?
No, absolutely. Well, first of all, I mean, you got to give kudos to Bitcoin because we were never introduced to blockchain until we had Bitcoin. So it's the first of its kind. And so I very much have come to respect Bitcoin itself. Was it a stretch for me to say it could or should be a stored value? Certainly. But I've also, I can argue the case that gold has intrinsic value. I could go either way with that. But I had, you had to respect gold's place as well. So certainly, Bitcoin specifically is earned its place, and so I respect it. But what I'm more confident of is the technology that it's introduced has applications across pretty much every sector that's out there, and it's not just going to change the world; it is changing the world, and I believe it can change the world for the better in so many ways that I'm very, very fond of, and so I'm enjoying very much trying to get as close to the front as I possibly can to watch it unfold and watch it develop and also to benefit from it. I'm an opportunist clearly as a fund manager and I very much believe in its future and its application across all sectors. So.
So you mentioned the world stage recently. We can go over some of the headlines. For instance, it is costing, 75% more for a single family home than it did in 1987. Inflation is a big story. There's just so many headlines. I'm just pulling them up actually real quick. I didn't have this 100% ready to go. So Amazon's hitting sellers with a 5% fuel and inflation fee. Real wages are falling. Inflation is surging. The Fed has been, as according to some, slow to act. But what can they do? I imagine there's going to be diminishing returns for quantitative easing and injecting that capital. And in fact, there might become a time when it becomes politically risky, geopolitically risky. Deflation, I think, is something that is creeping increasingly into the discussion. We're only at the beginning of that trend. And I think deflation might be actually something that is worse than the little bit of inflation we've experienced thus far. I mean, unfortunately, while inflation, as Austrian economists argue, hurts the poor the most, the increase in the price of food that we've seen recently is actually not horrible. Compared to what could be coming down the line. And perhaps that's a logical fallacy comparing it to what could be. However, I mean, we're only 2 years after what the IMF termed the Great Lockdown. or a little bit more than 2 years. And the cascading economic effects of shutting down global economies have been felt in the Southern Hemisphere, I think, in poor economies first and foremost. And it's only seemingly been getting worse for those in the developed world. And so the trend is for it to continue going in that direction. Gas prices have been coming down a little bit. We saw, I think, oil get up to, I don't recall the right number, the exact number, maybe 110. People were paying 589, at least in places like San Diego and higher in LA.
Sure, sure.
Tell us about what you're looking at when it comes to the macroeconomic picture.
Well, absolutely, and one of the things I definitely want to comment on, because I don't think it's either well understood or people just don't like to talk about it. I'm just going to say it. Americans have benefited for years from being able to dish off their inflation to the rest of the world, and that was part of the Bretton Woods Agreement, and other countries basically being forced to trade in U.S. dollars. We've continued to benefit from that. And so while a lot of the world works simply so they can eat and pay for the basics, it's not like that for us in America. And so we've really benefited from a much, like the portion of our incomes that we spend on gas and food and essentials is minuscule compared to what a lot of the world does. And so we're very fortunate there. Now, I think at the rate we've recently started to print money, and with the velocity of money has picked up, which is far more significant than the number of zeros are adding to the supply. It's we're I think we are. I think it's unavoidable at this point that we are headed for some real pain. Wages are going up, but they're not going to be able to keep pace, I don't think, with the increases in the cost of living. And you're absolutely right. That is certainly going to affect lower and middle class families, far more than it is the upper class. And it is unfortunate because inflation, as you know, is the hidden tax. And so we're headed for very scary times. There's no doubt about it. Politicians are, of course, blame the opposite party. So whoever's in office is going to blame the other one. And there's a lot of Mickey Mouse that happens there, and it's unfortunately, sometimes it's shameful to think that adults who have somehow managed to get themselves in these positions of power act like children, but they do. They bicker, and they're all passing the buck back and forth, and that's unfortunate. But it is what it is. But there's no doubt higher prices are here to stay. It's not. This is not just a transitional thing or a temporary thing. It's permanent. The world is changing at a very rapid pace right in front of our eyes, and we must prepare for higher prices. I think you're right. I think deflation does come in. What also maybe isn't obvious is that when there's easy money, and people can borrow it, that obviously that's inflationary. When people pay that money back, and they are going to have to at some point, that will create deflation, and that also could be very, very painful, because you could have um, the cost of living is going to go up, and then all of a sudden you're going to have significant deflation in asset prices, and it's going to be a crunch both ways, I think, potentially. And it's tough. It's going to be really, really tough, to say it as plainly as I can. So
I think, yeah, this deflation threat is perhaps not discussed enough. And I'll give a shout out. I drive around the radio here in Idaho, and there's a certain flavor of radio is pretty much all you can get here. And so I was listening to Mark Levin, a Fox News host, who is, I think, quite erudite. I don't agree with him on everything. And one thing I have to give him credit for is discussing deflation. He's discussing deflation. He's bombastic, of course. He also kind of fits into, I think, an ideological box in some ways, which I think doesn't serve him or his listeners well. But those critiques I can make of anyone. I'm just trying not to turn anyone off the fact that this Fox commentator is discussing deflation and the threat thereof. And we have this misconception that not that Hitler came to power because of the Weimar hyperinflation of 1923, but Hitler didn't come to power for 10 years later. And I believe that Germany was actually facing deflation at that time, which I think if we understood this more, we could then have a discussion about deflation in that context as opposed to hyperinflation, which I think is the way in which most of us are sort of imagining the perhaps consequences of some of these economic policies. One of the reasons why I also I'm trying to direct this show in a certain way is to actionable advice, not only for people, everyday people, but also for the people who find themselves in power. And so, Jason, this won't be an easy question, but I guess in terms of you know economic solutions, policy solutions to potential economic decline, depression, deflation, hyperinflation, what sort of policies might we be able to implement if you had the ear of a statesman? So I'll go first. For instance, maybe we can low and mid-tier companies could be deregulated. They could have a elaborate system of tax incentives implemented, or even better, more simply, just lower taxes, tax cuts, tax breaks for low and medium companies. And the reason tier companies, and the reason why I don't include big companies in there is because I don't think that might not be politically viable, quite frankly. So small business is important. It creates jobs. They got it rough in 2020 during the lockdowns, whereas big box companies were often able to stay open. Many companies were deemed non-essential, small businesses, and they weren't able to compete then with Walmart. So solutions, what kind of policy solutions do you think we could implement, I guess, at the political level?
Yeah, certainly. I mean, it's a fair question, and if I'm completely honest in how I answer your question, I would probably come more off as a fatalist than anything, and I don't want to do that because I recognize that in the here and now we had to deal with reality we're at. I feel like we have this big aircraft carrier that is going in this direction, and the only way to save the day it's going to crash unless we can literally turn it around on a dime. And I don't know how to I don't know how possible that is, but certainly, we make the most of what we can. And I was on a call just yesterday. I met someone who's running for governor here in Minnesota, and really enjoyed his presence. He's actually pro Bitcoin and blockchain, and so that was one of the reasons why the call was set up in the first place. We appreciate politicians who are going to be welcoming to that technology, and so, but he made a comment, and his comment was, we have to have a balance in how we tax the rich, is what he said. And I said, I thought to myself, I wasn't there to be confrontational or to challenge his beliefs. I was just listening to him and hearing him out. And when he said that, I thought to myself, I said, no, there's no balance in the idea of taxing the rich. That is never the solution. The problem I have with both sides is they both want to rule through coercion. They both want to rule through force. And so it doesn't matter which way you swing it. Um, if your plan is to force people to do something or to take money from one group and give to the other, it's never going to work. I'm not against charity. I'm not against benevolence. But I think the last thing you want to do is tax the rich. It doesn't make any sense to me because that's who creates jobs and that's where they come from. And it's unfortunate that even this guy who I thought was pretty sensible, he's sensible enough to want to put policies in place that benefit this new technology that you and I both believe in. But not sensible there. And so if we think the solution is more taxation, we're going to cripple ourselves. And I think this new administration is doing quite a bit in that regard. Whereas the previous administration, although I'm certainly I would never consider myself a Trumper by any means, and he's no freedom fighter in my opinion, or ruler of the free people by any means. Not, at least not to the standards I would prefer. But I certainly respected the pro business side of him, and I think that we must have that if we're to flourish as a nation. So one of the most basic things I learned in economics is Peter Schiff wrote a book, How Economy Crashes and Why It Grows, or yeah, why an economy crashes and how it grows, or something to that effect. And it's basically a cartoon. You could read it to your kids. It's an excellent book, but it's really two things that are important to any economy, and that's savings and production. Savings and production. Savings and production. He just drills that home in that book, and it was really good for me early in my studies on this topic to just have that ingrained in me. Like, okay, that's what makes an economy grow, is savings and production. And unfortunately, right now with low interest rates, there's no incentive to save money, so that's a problem. Production, I will say, I think is coming back to the U.S., which I think that's good. I think we're going to see a move in that direction, and that's beneficial. So I'm excited about that, and that can help us. The oil that we have here in the U.S. is I think can be very productive for our economy, and I think we need to do everything we can to encourage that, to do it in in the most environment friendly way, of course, because I also respect our earth and believe that we need to, even as as someone who's in the mining business, we have to be responsible for and steward our land well, properly, and mining methods have gotten much better over the years, but certainly I think we need to be pro mining, and all the alternative energies, they all require mining too, so we can't forget that. There's no way to avoid it. So I think being pro mining, being pro business, those are very, very important things. And if we could somehow begin again to incentivize savings, that would be beneficial. Of course, the problem is if they raise rates, they're kind of stuck in a tough place now. They really can't afford to do that. So it's tough.
I suppose when they raise rates is when we might get a bout of deflation, because then there will be a decrease in the quantity of money out there. Can you speak more about the deflation problem?
Yeah, I mean, it's just like I alluded to or said, you can't. They're stuck. They are absolutely stuck, because if they raise rates, they'll default on the debt, and we enter deflation really, really fast. If rates go up, it's going to be less incentivizing for businesses to borrow the money, and that creates a problem. And so the market will slow down the more they raise rates. But that's why I say it's a tough position they're in. There is no easy way out of this. There just isn't. And so that's why even the conversation about what policies can be put in place, it almost feels too late to do anything real significant with it. So and so and not to mention that there's such a divide on what can and should be done, that's also a significant problem with the two-party system. My opinion is there more than anything to pit two sides against each other, and it's a significant part of the problem. The gridlock is tough. It's really tough these days. So
Patrick Byrne argues that Bitcoin is the product of 500 years of liberalism and classical economics, which today is often known as libertarianism. And it's interesting to see the ways in which the American system of government, namely, reflects these later technologies that would arise, Bitcoin with its decentralization, for instance. So in the American political system of government, you have 50 states which have certain level of rights, which is a form of decentralization, as well as 3 branches of government, which is yet another form of decentralizing power. And so we've seen that play out over the last 2 years. States like South Dakota, which didn't lock down at all. I think we've seen many governors perhaps regret shutting down initially and have since then taken stances that it's something that they want to do again, namely because they don't see that the data reflects that it should be done again. That's their argument. Any thoughts on sort of how it's playing out with the states? You're in mining. We can bring this back to mining. We see Nevada is a business-friendly state and has been, and there's quite a bit of mining there. And then another state in the US, which I think is a leading mining state, is Idaho. and Idaho is known for, I think what Idaho is known for is largely because it has a small government. And so the way in
Sure.
which life is led here is different than, say, California or New York. Can you speak to kind of sort of the American political system, the decentralizing aspect of it, Bitcoin in the tradition thereof, and then also how you in the mining space are able to take advantage of that?
Sure. I don't mind. I'm sorry. Ask the question one more time. I want to make sure I followed it. So
Mhm. Yeah, there was too much there.
no,
I
it's
guess
okay.
the question, I guess, is okay, so I've laid out that you've got the 50 states, you've got the three systems of government.
Yep.
That's very nice. Now, when it comes to the 50 states, I'm curious from the mining perspective, how are you able to take advantage thereof? Are there certain advantages of mining in certain states based on
S-
jurisdiction than others? And what are they?
yeah, certainly. So there's an incredible um, resource. Uh, Identified resource in the Rocky Mountains, and it goes all throughout that western vein. Colorado touches Nevada, Utah, all the way into Idaho and into Canada. Canada, Canada, of course, has a tremendous amount of resources as well, and so um, yeah, there's certainly a smaller population, per square mile, or however you would define that, and the population isn't as dense, and so I think that certainly helps to create a better, a stronger mining environment. But certainly, it doesn't explain all of it. I think there's probably a lot more to it than that, but yeah, the local governments, or even at a state level, are crucial to what can be accomplished in those states. And if you don't have a mining friendly jurisdiction, you're going to create problems. It's interesting that, you being from Idaho, the Coeur d'Alene area, you have, the top silver district in the country, and very mineral rich, very mining friendly. And you step over, like a mile, not even, you cross the border, and you have a completely different political environment that makes it very, very challenging. So, um, yeah, it's crucial. So, for instance, in the projects we take on, we're primarily focused in Idaho, and there's just a tremendous amount of still underexplored vein systems, and projects that are available out there that can be claimed, and a lot of money to be made there. But there's certainly um, um, there's more discoveries to be made. I'll say that. So, underdeveloped properties and whatnot. So we want to stick to the jurisdictions that make sense, and there's plenty of them out there. So yeah.
What are some of your favorite jurisdictions and why?
So I wouldn't consider myself an expert at this particular area, but again, we love Idaho. Utah is great. Nevada. Um, Nevada is basically a basin. So I learned this more recently. Actually, I'm actually part of a, a company. I'm on the board and an officer now, and we're looking at where should we make mining. It's sorry, I'm on the board and an officer of a junior mining company, an exploration company, and so we've had the conversation, where do we go? And if you look at the discoveries, a tremendous amount of discoveries have been made. I mean, if you look at a chart, it's off the charts. The amount of discoveries that have been made in Nevada in particular, and it's peculiar. Like, why does that happen? And certainly, it's because the government is mining friendly, but it's also there's a significant basin that forms there that protects the environment a lot more so than other places that you can mine. And so I think a lot of exploration has occurred in that region because it's conducive to protecting the environment and whatnot. You get outside of that basin, and it gets a little bit more challenging. And there's, you have to go through permitting processes that, um, that, and rightly so, that are going to make sure that you're going to, protect the environment and that sort of thing. And um, I think it's important to have a balance, a proper balance when you approach the conversation of should we allow mining here or there. There was a project up in Alaska that, in terms of the quantity of gold there, it was significant. It was huge, but it also had the potential to destroy the world salmon population. And even the Trump administration said no go. And I'm thankful for that. I mean, you want to protect what's there, um, no doubt about it. And at the same time, you don't want to just say no to mining altogether because your agenda is quite the opposite. And there's no way around mining. There is just no way around mining. Our economy, our society would not function without it. And so yeah. So again, I'm a fan of being environmentally responsible and sticking with jurisdictions that have found balance, in my opinion. So yeah.
It's actually the policy of this show that we want to mine as much and destroy as much of the environment as possible, just by nature of being interested in mining. Of course, that's not true.
Of course,
BBC,
you've taken some heat for that, I bet. I know.
yeah. BBC.com published a story yesterday. Mining fuels the modern world, but it also causes vast environmental damage. What would happen if we tried to do without it? There's a couple of things here. Mining has been around for a very long time. It predates the modern world, and in fact might form the basis of civilization. I guess as gold and silver have been historically the two forms of money alongside fiat, and of course in pre-civilization settings all sorts of items, and also on the fringes of civilization throughout history. But generally mining has formed the basis of our monetary system because we use gold and silver. So mining feels much more than the modern world. Yes. Okay. So environmental damage, obviously something that is fervently discussed and should be, and also improved over time. That is the effect of mining on the environment, thanks to technology. But this question, what would happen if we tried to do without it? Jason, I think that means we might even cease to exist ourselves. What do you think about like
Those
this
those
sort of,
those lithium batteries aren't gonna they're not gonna form by themselves. So yeah.
what do
Anyway.
you think about this kind of axiom and axiom being like positioned when it comes to mining? The thought just to do without it completely is
I,
quite irresponsible, in my opinion.
yeah, I just don't think it's reality based at all. So to be anti-mining is fine, but no, it's not fine. I'm sorry. I should back that up. I think mining in an environmentally friendly fashion, as much as that is possible, is the only solution, and there's just no way around it. And certainly, the mining practices of old were dangerous to water supply, and plenty of people have been hurt. Entire villages have probably been wiped out due to that. So there's horror stories, but the mining efforts of today and the mining processes are much different, much safer, much more aware than they were years ago. And so I think mining has probably gotten a bad rap in a lot of ways. And also there are mining companies that have ruined it just based on their lack of interest in restoring the earth after they're done, that sort of thing, and caring about it. They're very profit driven, focused, and didn't give a rip about uh, the environment. And that's not a solution, and that's a problem. And so I can see why there's been a reaction over the years to that sort of negligence. But certainly that's not something I would promote. And I think you're seeing most mining companies are making changes where it needs be, and the processes are much more tolerable, I should say. So you can call mining a necessary evil. How about it is, I guess. It would be great if there was a way to function society without it. I just don't know how that works. So unless we all want to live off the land for the rest of our lives, right? So
in this country too is probably where you'll get the most environmentally friendly mining, based on, I would guess, what I'm seeing and what a lot of experts are saying, which is why something like oil production here is something that should be celebrated by environmentalists. Because to get rid of oil, to cap oil production, as seems to be desired by some, or I guess
sure.
parroted by many. Also, in this article here, bbc.com, Future Planet, the general argument is that maybe governments one day will cap material footprints in much the same way that they're capping carbon footprints. From my imagination, the capping carbon output should then have an effect on material output, but perhaps to some that's just not enough, is quite frankly very dangerous, because oil, for instance, forms the basis of our civilization, and many people depend on civilization to survive. And so this notion that we should, without heeding the market at all, create policies around mining and resources such as oil without considering the grave impact that might have on the livelihoods of the most poor people is just incredibly irresponsible and unfortunate. And mining does get a bad rap, and a necessary evil. I think it might be a good way of looking at it.
Absolutely. You know, I would love to have a world that didn't need fossil fuels and no longer had to deal with some of the consequences of them. I'm a fan of alternative energies, but I think we have to be realistic about it as well. We're just not ready to support ourselves based on alternative energies, and we have to be really honest about the footprint that even acquiring those resources to be able to do alternative energies, how taxing that is actually still on the environment. So there's we just have to be honest with ourselves about what that's going to take to transition, and I'd love to see that happen, but it's going to take years, decades. So to be anti-oil is just, it's just kind of premature, and to have an agenda that doesn't allow what is the technologies that exist, to continue to take the main stage until alternatives are developed is just silly, and Europe, my understanding, I'm not an expert in this field by any means. I want to be careful I don't talk too far above my pay grade, but Germany in particular, they've made a big push to go to alternatives, but they left themselves pretty vulnerable by trying to be overly dependent on these alternatives, and they're just not ready to do it yet. And the lights could have gone out there with a really harsh winter, is my understanding, and there were some that were concerned that it would, and then you couple it with a war with Russia, where it's a lot of resources that come out of there, and you have some challenges. And so we have to be reality based about all this, and I think we need to approach it in a fair and honest, realistic way, and make room for what exists to continue to play its role until it's no longer needed, and that would be great. But I still say that's years down the line. So
Doesn't sound fatalistic at all. I think it's measured. Premature is a great word to describe a policy-based move towards renewable energies, and Germany is a great example of that, and lives are at stake with these policies, and implementing them prematurely is reckless. Now, mining, what do people need to know about the current state of the mining sector as we come to a close here, Jason?
What do they need to know?
In its current state today.
I mean, I'd love to speak at it from a from a pure speculation perspective, as an investor, or are you thinking more
as an investor? Yeah, please.
Yeah, look, there's not an asset class that I think you can find better value in. I would say it's the smart money that's gathered there, and it's waiting and it's acquiring. There will be a day still for gold and silver. Absolutely, it will do well. I don't think there's any question of that. As I said earlier, it's not a matter of if, it's only a matter of when. And I, for one, have at times looked at our allocation, our portfolio, and I'm like scratching my head, like, yeah, you got this part that's just not performing, and it kind of drags your overall returns down. But then you hit a, you come to a place where the miners and gold really started to rally this year, and then all of a sudden you're thinking to yourself, "Man, maybe I should allocate it a little bit more that direction." So I think you need to be mindful of all the factors. I think you need to be confident in your thesis, your decision to invest in the first place. And if you can't get confident around either of, Justin, your and I's two favorite asset classes, then just don't invest. Stay out and stick with the market if you want, the general market. But I think for those of us who are prudent enough to see what's happening behind the scenes, and we can actually see through some of the headlines and even ignore a lot of them, gold and silver absolutely, in my opinion, has its best days ahead. So I'm really excited to be in that sector, and I think the best is still yet to come.
So once you've chosen you want to invest in this sector particularly, where do you go from there? You mentioned you're on the board at a exploration company, which is its own niche within the wider
Yeah.
mining sector. Can you speak to more once you're at granular level, once you're looking into the miners, what are you looking at as an investor?
Yes. Absolutely. So, I'll just tell you what I did, my own experience, and why I came out to your neck of the woods originally was, I wanted to start staking silver claims, and it was, I wanted access to silver projects. It's something that hasn't been very mineable, only as a byproduct, and not as a standalone, not as a primary. Hey, let's go mine silver. There's not a lot of that right now in the world because it's just not been cost effective to do its prices. I think we look at the gold silver ratio, which is new to any of your listeners, I'm sure, and it's way out of whack. And there's a lot more value to be had in silver right now. And so for me, that's where I wanted to place my emphasis. Well, so I head out west, and was kind of feeling old school. We're gonna go stake some claims, and and just get our hands dirty in some projects that that we can explore, and bring to the market eventually. And in that process, I met a geologist who was going to help us in some of our projects, and he had his own gold project, that he stepped away from a very significant salary as a, and in his sector, and got away from it to pursue, on a full-time basis, this mining project that he kind of picked out of many. And he recognized the geology, and he said there's just an absolute tremendous amount of potential, and we're very clear to call it potential. But I ended up learning more about his project. I got to know him pretty well, and I'll say this, as an investor, one of the primary things I look for are the people. I care very much about the teams I work with and invest in. And to me, you can have a great project, but if you got a crummy team around it or too many egos involved, forget it. Just stay away. And so, what I met, a very humble man, and his name is Josh White. I think we should get him on your show eventually. But it's Lightning Creek
Anytime.
Resources. Yeah, and I got involved with his project. We made an investment. We bought a drill. We started exploring last year. We got that drill into action. I won't go into it. He can if he wanted to, if he does come on the show at some point in the future. But we had a really cool experience in obtaining a permit that actually hasn't been obtained before, and there was a couple of reasons why we were able to do that. And it's been fun. Still very early stages, still very speculative, but we like what we see so far. And so, for me, personally, and as a fund manager, I'm creating space for us to have a tremendous amount of our allocation towards the metal space to go specifically into this particular company that Josh White has founded. The name of it's Lightning Creek Resources. So yeah, very honored and privileged to be a part of that, and love what they're doing. yeah, so we're excited about our potential. So
Are you
and
strictly
and be but real quick, that's a that's a gold project. It's not a silver project. So I did veer away from my initial intent to come out there. I had nothing against gold. I just I like silver about better because it's undervalued. But certainly I'm happy to get involved with the gold project. Yeah, so just wanted to clarify that.
Mhm. And are you staking claims only in Idaho, or and if so, or if not, what have you learned during that process? What's it like going out there in the field? And as an investor, what are you looking for beyond team, I suppose?
So yeah, certainly. Yeah, so we have stuck to Idaho. It's not that we're not willing to go outside of there. It's just the contacts that I had made prior to. I wanted to get as close as I could to the uh, Silver Valleys, and I wanted to be as close to that as I could. I knew it'd be difficult to get right into the heart of it probably, but I assumed that there would be a lot of, geology surrounding, the actual Silver Valley that would be beneficial. And so that's what we did. We started looking for projects right in that area, and I'd rather get as close to the heart if I can. I think there's just as many gold and silver discoveries to be made in Idaho as there has been in Nevada. Um, I just do, and so I think as this mining sector heats up, you're going to see a whole lot more exploration come to Idaho in particular and surrounding states. So yeah.
We look at the headlines today for gold. It's just hit a 1 month high as high inflation boosts the appeal of it. It's on course for a weekly gain as Ukraine and inflation narratives play out. I think things we're quite hot again today in Ukraine after a lull in the headlines. Things, at least in the headlines, seem to be picking up there. There's tensions between Finland and Russia, namely, I believe another country as well, if I'm not mistaken, Sweden. Uh, Russia set fixed gold price as it restarts official bullion purchases. I believe it was something like 5,000 rubles per gram, and
Sure.
it's honoring that between March 28th and June 30th. So we're seeing geopolitically, macroeconomically, big headlines playing out for gold. What are your thoughts on gold creeping back into the headlines, really, in a new way?
Hey, here's my honest opinion is the longer it takes for it to creep back in the headlines, the better, because the more I can acquire, right? I'd rather not have the competition, to be honest, because once this space takes off, my God, and you've witnessed it before, right? It's like a rocket, and I think with all the other geopolitical factors involved, um, it's just that thing is primed and ready to go. So when it happens, it's going to happen. I think we're looking good, gold and silver. I think we're looking really really good, but I don't pretend to understand the timing of it because I thought it would have happened 10 years ago, and I was following a lot of people that were absolutely convinced it would, and it just didn't. So how long it'll take to play out, I don't know. But like I said, the longer it takes to play out, it just gives me more time and gives any of your listeners more time to acquire. By the way, I'll just make a note of this, and I think most of your listeners probably know this, but would I rather invest in gold, physical gold, or the miners? I think it's really good to have some physical metals, absolutely, as a foundation to anyone's wealth plan. But certainly, and I'm a little bit more risk tolerant than most, a lot more risk tolerant perhaps than a lot of people. But I would much rather buy the miners than I would the physical metals. I think in particularly in the beginning stages of any bull run within the industry, you're going to see the metals. Well, I'm sorry, you're going to see the miners uh, far outperform the physical metals, and so that to me makes sense uh, to be in that space. And a really simple way to do that is to buy the ETF GDX. Sorry, that gives you a good variety of the top mining companies in the world, and it's it's going to be a fun one to own. So yeah,
So miners with a good team.
Absolutely. If you're looking to, to do what I do and to look for specific companies to invest in, you have to have, yes, miners with a good team, and find guys that have done it before and have been successful. Um, if they've done it once, why can't they do it again, right? So, and there's plenty of those guys out there. There just are, and there's some really cool companies that are coming together. So,
Tell us about the Norstar Group.
absolutely, yeah. Norstar Group is really it's really an umbrella company to house everything I do. It was a way to identify with the public, to be honest. So underneath that umbrella or brand, there's several things that we do, from the funds that we run, to the venture capital that we deploy in the blockchain space, our metals allocation. And so, yeah, the Norstar Group it was just a way to bring it all together. It used to be really hard for me to tell people what I did, because there was a lot of moving parts, and my intent with the Norstar Group was to try and create some simplicity with what we do. And so we really came up with the theme where we connect investors with opportunity. Um, you know, managing a fund is not by any means the only thing that we do. And I also have a team now too, so that's why we went with group. And I got a really cool team of guys and a couple ladies. Would actually like to have more ladies on my team. Mix it up a little bit, but yeah, we have a team. I have been fortunate enough to assemble a group of guys that are much smarter than I am in their respective fields, and as a whole, we're really solid in I would say both the mining space and in the blockchain world. And love what we're doing. Couldn't be more excited about those two sectors. So Justin, I love. Remember the first time we met, and I know you had the website. Thought, man, he's got this thing figured out. And so I haven't met too many people that are married to those two sectors, to the same extent I am. So it was fun. Glad I've been able to get to know you. So
Likewise, the ideological divide, as represented by Pompliano and Schiff, between gold and silver and crypto by extension, is just a fallacy. It's immature, I think. It certainly is not nuanced. And I never really was seduced by this Bitcoin versus
sure,
gold thesis. And I don't think most people were, unless they have a lot of followers on Twitter. It may or may not behoove
yeah.
them to stir drama, and they certainly get addicted to followers. Well, Jason, it's been
Yeah,
a
and drama
pleasure.
and drama sells. Let's be honest. That's how newspapers make their world go around. And there's an awful lot of that drama. Unfortunately, I think it is what it is. So
Jason, it's been an honor getting to know you. I look forward to getting to know you more. And
absolutely,
we're out of time today. We've had the
sure,
honor of speaking with Jason Nordland. He is the founder of the Norstar Group. Thank you so much, Jason, for joining us today.
absolutely, really appreciate it. It's been a pleasure. So a lot of fun. Thank you.
Pleasure's all mine. And thank you, everyone, for listening.